I'm David Lefebvre. I am a data management, I'm leading the data management group here at Hawkridge, and I'm here with Chris Cook. Hey, Chris.
Hey.
Chris is a solution architect, one of our top experts on the data side. Chris got more than 24 years of experience with SolidWorks. 24 years. And more than 15 years with PDM and Kinecio, if you guys were around for Kinecio. So he's got quite a bit of experience here. He's also a big part of our development team that comes up with add-ins and custom solution for a customer. So this is going to be a big part of this presentation. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about engineering changes within SolidWorks PDM Professional. So as you guys may know, PDM Professional can use and store and manage engineering changes. But this session is geared towards comparing what you can get out of the box in PDM Pro and our own solution developed here at Hawkridge System, leveraging PDM Pro features, but greatly enhancing it with automation, ease of use to handle smoothly all your engineering change in PDM Pro. So as a quick agenda here, I want to just quickly give you a lay of the land. So we're going to go and talk about how to start the engineering changes in the out-of-the-box solution and in the solution that we came up with. And then we're going to talk about managing approvals, managing notification, managing affected documents, and finally give you a technology overview of the Hawkridge System engineering change solutions. So without further ado, I think I'm starting, right, Chris?
You're starting.
All right, let me share my screen. Cool, awesome. So let me start in my vault. You guys might recognize, and I'll stop my webcam so it's not in the way. So as you may recognize a PDM Pro vault, I have my green folder, everything looks good. I'm at the root of my vault. One thing that you want to have when you're doing engineering changes in PDM is a template. So what's great with PDM Pro out of the box is you can use an existing template that you already have within your company. So here, if you look at my templates, I have an Excel sheet that is basically my engineering change here. So you can see I have already a couple of fields on there. So you can just check this in and use that as your template. Now, the feature that I'm going to be using in PDM Pro, the template feature can be triggered from a right click, and I can select, I can name them whatever I want, but I have my new engineering change here that I can select. Now it opens the data card, or the template data card actually, and I'm leveraging my auto serial number here for my specific engineering change number. It will automatically put the user that's logged in as the person that created it, the date, those kind of things. I have a little drop down here for the category. I have, I can select my manager from here. I can put a description. I'll just put D2M presentation, and then I can browse for the file that is affected. Now this, I'm just gonna go in my project here and select that 2-finger attachment. This is all information that will go in my file. So I have it to be created in this EC folder. You can see that, today I'm on a mountain time, so it's 2 p.m. for me here. So I just created this engineering change from my template, and if I open it, you'll see that I have all the information I entered in PDM inside my Excel document. So that's really nice for me to not have to retype the specific number, the category, the date, the manager, the D2M presentation, and the affected file here. So there's good integration between PDM and Office, so I can put that information towards the document. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, the affected item that I listed here is just to be shown in the document. If I want to go a step further, what I can do is browse the actual component in my vault and use a feature called paste as reference. So for now, I'm just going to copy it, go back to my engineering change, and I'm going to leverage that feature paste as reference to create a custom reference between that engineering change and that affected items or affected part assembly actually in PDM. So a quick check-in here, and I'll be able to see the in my contains. You can see that when I'm checking it in, it associate the file. It stays in its own folder, so I'm not moving any files, but it basically attached those two together, so I can have a good visibility through my contains tab here for affected items under my engineering change. One thing I want you guys to notice is those two documents are checked in two different workflow. So this one enters the change request, and this one was already in the release workflow of my CAD workflow in PDM. So if I decide to change the state on my engineering change, for example, and I submit the request just to be reviewed, let's say I'm going to select myself, David, and I'm going to say, two fingers need change. I'm also going to say, please review. The one thing I want you guys to notice here is that, all those files are not going to transition. They're in a different state. They're actually in a different workflow. So I'm basically right now just asking for a review of the actual engineering change here. I'm going to submit them. So that's how I start my process in an out-of-the-box functionality in PDM. Now let's take a look at what it would look like if I was starting this kind of process, but with the Hawkridge engineering change tool. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, David. So over the years, our team has looked at different ways to implement engineering change, and we went back and forth on how deeply we wanted to make a plugin that automated the process. And I think what we finally settled on was a collection of plugins that do very specific things. And we found that over the long haul, being able to administer them and understand what's expected of each one, it makes the whole process a lot more flexible. So one of the key ones in this whole process we're going to talk about is advanced actions. And I'll get into the details of them in the technical section a little bit later. But for now, let's just jump right in and look at how we start an engineering change here. Now I'm going to do two different ones. I'm going to start with someone who may not, I'm logged in as an engineer right now, but you have a lot of different people that might contribute to the change process that aren't necessarily engineers. They aren't privy to the deep details of how the designs go together and maybe not know exactly which files or documents need to change. But they need to be able to alert you when things go wrong or need fixed or could be improved. And so leveraging those templates, as David mentioned, becomes really powerful. You can do that from anywhere in the Vault and just start one. And so for them, I'm just using a really simple template that has two prompts to describe, what should be changed. And for this example, I've got an excavator model that we're going to look at in a moment. That, some wear pieces are wearing out too soon, right? So that's the reason. We'll pop that in the reason request. So you can kind of ask them for some of the minimum amount of information that you're going to need from them to keep get the process going. And we hit OK. As you would expect in PDM, that's going to generate a document. So in this case, it's creating a template, and it's a little different than David's. David used an Excel file. That was one area that we explored quite a bit when we were coming up with a solution. We wanted to keep it flexible, so we didn't lock you into any kind of file type specifically. In my case, I'm using a virtual document that's just an EC file, and it captures information. So I can see who submitted the request, the date, automatically gets a new number, and puts in the information that we know. So this captures, that minimum input that they put in there. And then if you wanted to add some affected items, that can happen a little later in the process. My workflow that I'm going to be working with for these engineering change documents looks like this, right? They, oops, that's not the right one. There we are. It starts as a change request. It's going to go through a review. And the idea here is that you want it to be reviewed by somebody that knows a bit about the design and can decide whether it's a feasible request. So does it get canceled right away? Does it get sent back for some more details? Or can it be kind of dispositioned as a simple change where you can get to work on it right away? Or does it need to go through a change board? And that's going to be another part of the solution that we look at. So I'm just going to submit it to request review. And that's where somebody on the engineering team will do that affected items submission. So I'll just right click and change state. So where our technology comes in then is we could go into our CAD documents if we know, exactly which ones are relevant to this particular process. I'm just going to take a couple of part files here. And currently you see they're sitting in released. I right click, do a change state. I've got two options. In this case, I'm going to attach it to a change request because I already have one that exists. So it's not a special command. This is literally just a workflow transition. And now it's asking me to select a change request to attach it to. So let's make sure I grab the right one. And we're going to move these out of released, attach them as references. And now if I select one of these and look at its where used, there's the engineering change it belongs to, right? And they're sitting in a change pending. So the idea here is that for my CAD documents, I've got this kind of limbo state where things come out of release to let people know that there's potentially going to be a change impacting them. It may get kicked back to release with nothing happening to it, or it may get sent to work in process where it gets checked out and actual edits are made. But this allows me to really simplify what's going on in the CAD world as far as my workflow goes and concentrate all of my my complexity in the actual change process itself. The other option we've got is if we know exactly what files need changed, we can go right to them. Let's say I know I need to change this assembly and replace one of its components. I'm just going to request change. Again, as far as the end users are concerned, it's just another transition. Now I'm going to make sure that I only transition the specific files that I want to change. So I'm just changing the assembly.
So Chris, you get different access. You can basically attach from different points, right?
Exactly. So in this case, the components are damaging the samples in the field, so we're going to replace the attachment. Since we know what assembly needs dealt with, we can put that detail in there. We can ask for an implementer. I'm going to direct it to Eddie again. He's requesting that change. And if we needed to go through a review board, here's another component to this solution for doing parallel approvals. Right? So I can enable or disable it based on this checkbox and then select my approvers. So we support both required approvers and optional ones. So if I select, let's say, a manager here and leave the operations blank, there's only one approver that's required. If I select them both, then they both have to sign off in order for it to progress or to be marked as approved. And then we can additionally add optional approvers or users that would be observers. They can contribute, they have valuable input, but they ultimately aren't the decision makers to decide whether it's approved or not. Some of our customers use that. I'd say the majority of them just use required, but it's there as an option if you need it. And then we hit OK. And just like we saw before, it generates a template, creates a change document, and it's actually going to attach it. So this is now in the change request state. I'm going to browse over to it. Look at its data card. And it also copied that affected items right into a field for us, in addition to attaching it as a reference. So we use this reference in our plugin to help link these two processes together. Right? You don't have to rely on transition names being the same. We can leave the transitions to be instructive to our users, specific to the type of document going through the transition, instead of trying to match them up with different workflows.
Awesome. Cool. So
let's look at managing these approvals, David. How do we typically handle that now in PDM?
Yeah, let me share my screen. I'll show what we can do with sequential approval, what we can do with notification, and then we can see a little bit of the difference between the two. So I just logged in as a different user here with my user. If you're comfortable with PDM, you probably know at this point I'll be getting a notification in here. So in my panel here, I would be getting a notification that tells me more about where the file is and where to find that file. So that's pretty straightforward. If I look at my workflow here, I can set a notification between every step. So I use a workflow that is very similar to Chris. But Chris had a review board. As you could see on his data card, you could trigger, who is mandatory for approval and who's optional. You don't have that capability in PDM Professional out of the box. What you can use is something called the submit or the parallel approval. So in here, this approval this transition compared to a normal transition, which only requires one person to do. This one, I can create roles and I can put more user in there and have required user. So there's not this possibility of having required and optional. You really have in the background as an admin to set up who would be basically mandatory within a group. So your optional becomes kind of like within that group that are all receiving, let's say, a notification. They need to go in and approve that, and first in line to do it then gets to approve it. So there's a bit of a lack of functionality of flexibility and also just really identifying who's going for that approval. The other thing that we leverage in the out-of-the-box functionality for an engineering change is a little bug in PDM. And I'm pretty sure this bug never got fixed because it eventually became a feature. So if you look at this transition here between request review on my engineering change workflow, I put a transition called assign simple change. And that goes in work in progress for my engineering change. And if I look at my general workflow for CAD, I did put also in assign simple change from release to change pending. Because those two transitions are named the same, and this is why I'm saying it's a little bit of a bug, but it became a feature over time. I'm allowed to, let's say, go in my vault, and this is the request I had earlier with the two-finger attachment. You can see it's in release. This one's in request review. And once I trigger the change state on this one to assign simple change, because they have both the same name of transition, you can see that those guys are able to be transitioned. And then I can leverage the notification for notifying someone. This is a great feature here for dynamic notification. I can notify certain people within a group. That's kind of also a way to work around the fact that I cannot choose ad hoc the approver. Maybe a notification can suffice, but there's no no real voting or accountability to it. It's more of a notification. But this trick here allows me to bring the engineering change and the files together, even if they're in different workflows. So that's a nice trick that you can use. The other thing here that I really like is, you can enforce comments. So I'm just going to put a test in here, or with a typo, and I'm not going to select some things, just telling me about that. But this, as you can see, did my change in both workflow, and then I can keep going in my process, and then eventually bring them back to release with the same, with an admin approval or something like that, something that is named the same in both transition. So you can see that I can work around with the functionality that I have in PDM out of the box, but it's not as flexible as the tools that we came with the Hawkridge solution. So Chris, would you like to give us a bit of an overview of the functionality that we added that leverage actually the PDM Pro functionalities, but automate and make it way smoother?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this section, we're primarily going to see two different plugins, or at least the behaviors that they provide around these approvals and the notifications both. These two have actually been around with us for a while. So Advanced Actions is new, and these are a bit more experienced, I guess. If I try to take these two engineering changes that were just in there as requests, now I'm logged in as the manager, and I go to change their state. Say I'm going to submit them to the review board. What we'll see is that one of them can go just fine, the other one can't. Right? That I didn't have the change control board checkbox on, so it's really just going to be a simple change. So we're kind of blocking that. So we can use all of these variables we create to kind of help guide these documents through their respective processes. So I'm going to send this one to the review board. And some of you may have noticed there's a tab over here on the right. So on my data card, when our change board is set, I've got a selection of users. Again, those required approvers versus our optional kind of observers. Now, on the back end, we've also got some logic that we're capturing. So we check off some boxes when anyone votes, like when a regular user or an optional approver votes versus a required, and then once they all have. And again, all is determined by, well, how many of these people were selected. So if you've got like 10 potential groups that might be interested in contributing or signing off, you don't have to fill in all 10 boxes. If you fill in 5, then you've got 5 approvers. So it becomes more document specific about how detailed that process has to get. We found that's been a great balance of flexibility and being able to do that. So in order to actually approve, instead of pushing it through a transition, we go to our CCB tab and we get a list of the approvers that were selected on the data card. And we get a thumbs up and a thumbs down, which we're all familiar with. And so if you're logged in as one of those users, these buttons will actually be selectable. So we'll put in our comment. And that's going to log that information then to the data card for our change document. We'll also change the colors in here. I'll swap in and swap back. You can see now mark is green, the date, timestamp from when we did the approval, and our comment there. So by leveraging the data card variables to control the kind of dynamic approvals, we're also leveraging them for our communication, for the notifications that pop through the system. And one of the biggest requests we would get from our customers around notification is, can I control the contents of these messages? Because there's some pretty detailed templates that SOLIDWORKS provides, but not a lot of good ways to modify them or edit them or kind of tailor them to the situation. So our custom notification then allows you to design the subject, so it can be very specific to the exact transition or approval that's needed. Can leverage variables on the documents going through that transition, and then we can include, the whatever card information about those documents is relevant. And of course, we provide hyperlinks so that you don't have to go search for it or remember what the number is. You can just click on it and follow it straight to the source. And this then also becomes true of any delays. What we see in the workflow is that there's a nice place for delayed in state notifications, but there isn't a way to make that conditional so that we can push it to a specific data card recipient. So, and you end up kind of blanket broadcasting these delay messages, and our solution kind of eliminates that, allows it to redirect it to the same people that were responsible in the first place. So you're not making everybody filling up their inboxes with stuff they're going to ignore. All right. So I think with that, we'll just kind of review the technology that we're using underneath this to make all this happen. And the first one I'll kind of go into a little more detail, because it's really kind of the backbone of the automation here, is this advanced actions. So first thing we saw that we can do is we can now use a workflow to trigger a template. So we saw that with the engineering change. Select your CAD models, let it create a template. Part of those settings allow it then to also attach it as references. So that can be its own action that happens, like we saw with somebody just starting an engineering change without knowing what needs to change. But it can also be part of the trigger template creation too.
And this is key, right, Chris? Because as you saw on my end, I had to trigger the template from a right click. There's no way I can trigger the template through a workflow. Same thing for reference. I was, browsing and copying the file and then going back to the engineering change and pasting it there. So that happens in the background. So those are all nice little automation here.
Yeah, and just as a little background information, we haven't. This is fairly new simply because we didn't have the API triggers to be able to do that until recently. So we couldn't trigger a template as a listened action. We had to recreate the template through the API if we wanted to do that. Obviously, we don't want to have to recreate the wheel if it's already there.
And this is the best part about those custom tools is we're not coming up with features that are out there and they're difficult to maintain. We're leveraging the existing feature of PDM Pro and automating them, which is just really nice. Right.
Let's just take the repeatable steps, things you're going to have to do. If there's defined logic about them, that's an easy thing to automate, right? If there are rules that get followed, that's perfect. So yeah, that last action that this plugin does is the triggering of specific workflow transitions from another transition. So we saw in our engineering change document, as we move it through the workflow, it moves the affected items through their workflows. Now, all mine were just CAD files, but you may have Office documents, instruction sheets, all kinds of other things that may need changed that aren't in the same workflow as the CAD documents. So this will allow you to set up multiple triggers within that same action, so that if our engineering change then is ready to start work, we can transition, 3 or 4 different workflows to all move their respective documents to the appropriate states.
And you're saying that I don't have to use the same name?
And they don't have to be the same name. And then the other nice thing is that we don't even have to give users access to those triggered transitions. So if we look in here, for example, this is my engineering chain. Well, I'm going to switch over to the general workflow. if I look at start work, for example, where you come out of change pending, right? And now somebody actually has to do something. If I look at the permissions here, I've got 2 users that can do that. Admin, because we always give admin full privileges. And then I've got an agent user that I created for my advanced actions. They can permit it. But an engineer or a designer isn't even going to see this as an option. So nobody can do, accidentally trigger the wrong event or push things through that shouldn't have gone through when they were, approving another document, maybe a parent assembly or something. So it really kind of builds into that security model to make sure you're doing, performing the actions you want specifically on the files you've targeted.
Yeah, so once the file are in an enduring change, that basically makes that enduring change kind of your master, or the driver of that change, right?
Right. Right. And as we saw in that notification, that we can also write information to the affected items. So in our advanced actions, one of those triggers, and I put it in the list there. If we want, let's say this goes to start work, and the user is going to have to check that out and make versions of that file when it gets there. We can write the ECO number into a variable. So sometimes I know customers want to put that in their title blocks in the drawing. Well, if the drawing has that information now in a custom property that this is the latest, ECO, that they don't have to copy and paste it. It just happens as part of the. How about I? There we are. And likewise, I had that the implementer, right, that I would select. In this case, it was Eddie. Right. Maybe you don't put that information into those affected items until it's actually ready for the work to start. That you may change who's assigned to this. So if we look down there, we've got a stamp files action. And most of these actions can be done by a proxy user, so you don't have to give the users the permission to check out files and update variables, in certain states. You can just let the plugin do that kind of work for you. And so it's just organized by workflows and then by transitions. So pick the transition that makes sense and then tell it what you want to trigger. So in this case, I'm doing it before the transition. It's kind of a pre-check. Say I want this is the user rights I want to use. This is the workflow that I want to transition. And if you want to limit it to specific types of files to trigger the action, as well as specific types of files within that workflow, you can do that as well. A lot of granularity there.
This is literally my favorite part of this tool is you can come up with all the workflow you want. You're still in charge of, putting together the process that you want to put, for your CAD, for your engineering change. This tool allows you to tap into those workflow and make some action happen out of those, but it doesn't take away the flexibility of PDM, where a lot of engineering change process might just lock you in. This is, how you're supposed to do engineering change, and this is what you get, right?
Exactly. Yep. If you want, we created templates early on to capture the engineering change, but maybe at the end of that process, you need it to trigger a new template, right? So a change request then spawns a change order, which then spawns a change notice. If you want to get that granular with it, you can. You've got that option then. The change control board has been there for a while. It was actually implemented, or we created the first variations of it just as SolidWorks was implementing the parallel transitions. And so on one level, it seemed a little redundant, but it's proved to be, I guess, a lot more flexible than doing it through the workflow. For instance, the list of subject matter experts on any given set of documents might be very different, in one area of the vault or another, or just by the nature of what they are. And so by keeping the workflow common, right, the process isn't changing, but who's responsible changes maybe based on the document type or where it is or the type of change. This gives you that flexibility again to simplify the workflow and let the data card variables kind of help drive, who's approving, who's responsible, and move it through the process that way. And then finally, that custom notifications. We created it about the same time and for much the same reason. Certainly we added more to it over time, but again, being able to target specific users identified on the card as maybe the project leads or the engineering leads or the design lead or whoever is important for that part of the process. It's very difficult if you've got to do that in the workflow, because now you might have to create a bunch of duplicate workflows or 20 different transitions that apply to different groups, and it's just easier if you can kind of keep the process simple and leverage some logic and conditions to direct it the right way. And then the delayed in state, was a big opportunity, and that's still very relevant here. Again, resending the reminders to the same people that you sent them to before. What David showed with the dynamic notifications is great, except that information isn't logged anywhere. So if it has to get kicked back to get some edits made and then resubmitted, if you don't remember who you sent it to the first time, you could put different people. And if it's a long list of employees, then you can certainly use the filtering. But again, you don't have a record of who you sent the notification to before. This puts it on the data card, makes it a bit more traceable and more accountable. So if we look at those, I just want to show the custom notifications. Because the first kind of big benefit here, again, is the templates. You get to decide what these notifications contain. So here I have a number of templates, depending on where they are, it is in the process. So I've got a different one that I send to the people that are implementing it versus the ones that I send to review it. So, here I just have something that you have work to do, but I could also say that, and now in my message, it's going to put whatever the number variable value is for that document that triggered it right in the subject. They're going to know exactly what document to work on. And down here, there's always going to be a file list with the hyperlinks. So we can use this variable option here to decide what's the important information about the files that are going to be in that kind of data grid that you're going to want to see in the notification. So you have control over that. You can put these variable links in the body too. We try to keep the syntax common to what you're already using in PDM to make that simple. And then the delay report. Once you've assigned one of these the reminders on a delayed in state, you can click View Report, and that just runs a SQL query about all the documents that are sitting in the workflow state you defined it against and how long they're there. So I'll have a pretty big list of stuff that's been sitting stale for very long, but unless I didn't set one up for this, which I may not have. Oops.
So that would be for, someone that's a manager or something to just catch what's pending, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And the setup for applying a state or a delayed in state notification is pretty simple. Probably good that I brought this up anyways. Yeah, I didn't set one in there. So you just add it and you say, okay, which workflow am I concerned with? Let's say the engineering change. I want the change board ones to, I'll give them a few days. Which template do I want to use? So I would probably create one specifically for this. I'll put the required reviewer template in there, but I would create one for a delay just so I can mark it urgent and make the language a bit more, a bit stronger. And then you define which variables are containing the recipients. So which users and or groups. You could use groups in here if you want. Generally for approvals and stuff for CCB use, we would likely use a user, but could be a group. And now that I have that, now I can run the report.
But not only the report, but this would generate delay and state notification, as you're going, right?
Yeah, we leverage a task for that. I'll let that sit over to the side. I may just not have created one yet. Oh, it's thinking, I can tell.
Hey, I didn't want to steer you another way.
No. I need to create my task first.
Meanwhile, you guys are pretty quiet in the chat and the Q&A, and I know that's it's a lot of information, very geeky information. But please ask any question if you're wondering what's happening in the background or something, how things are working. If you need more clarification, I'm more than happy to answer those.
Yeah. So you can create a custom task in PDM, or you just right-click, say I want to create a task, and if any add-in is specified as a task-enabled add-in, it will show up in that list. And so that's all we're doing here. And I'll go to my task host configuration. Permit my notifications. Oops. And this one we can schedule. So if you're sending out reminders, you don't have to do that a lot, right? You just want to do that like once a day, or, so you could say, well, let's just do this every day at, 3 o'clock in the morning. That way, when they come in first thing, they'll have their reminders on their desk. Typically, you would allow, anybody, because it's just going to run in the background, so it doesn't really matter who the user is. We know if our notification was successful because we got a notification.
And I get a couple of questions in the chat about, what's Hawkware and where you can see those. So I'll be putting in the chat the location on our website. Hawkware is our line of product of custom add-ins and custom solution. So if you want to know more about these, we have them on our website where you can view their capability, you can view some video, and you can even reach out to see if it's a fit for you.
Exactly. Yeah, I think with this, we'll just kind of jump into the questions then. Start looking at the Q&A.
I have one from Marty here. If this can be set up to use the search and control using variable. Are you seeing that, Chris?
I am. Which one in particular?
Marty's got a question to Q&A. It says, can this be set up to use the search? And I'm not sure in control using variable. Not too sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that one.
There's a question from Bruce about, they said they just implemented 2019 and we're wondering what was the additional cost for Hawkware and how is it sold? So this is actually a good question about package. Chris, if you want to talk a little bit, because what you guys saw in this presentation is 3 different solutions: the advanced action, the custom notification, and the CCB. They can be purchased separately, but we also have bundles, especially for engineering change, where we bundle them together, so you have a complete solution, right?
Right. The advanced action's not up on the website yet, but it is purchasable independently. But what we find the most success is just bundling it all together. So the price point for doing it as a package is certainly a lot better than buying them each, kind of ad hoc and then adding them in yourself. 'Cause we want to make sure you're successful with them. So we know all the weird little nuances that with PDM that you might get hung up on if you're trying to implement them. But so we can help with that. But you certainly can buy any of them. I think the other 2 are in the store right now, so you can buy them online even. They're all licensed on just a site license for the customer, because once you put it in the vault, it's available to everybody. So we don't license them per user or anything like that. There is a manual that comes with the change control board and for custom notifications as well. There's and in fact, advanced actions has go to the settings. Jesse put a pretty exhaustive help in it. So help button down here, and it's actually a very useful screenshots and goes through all the settings and what they all mean and what needs to be configured at the template level. So very detailed help there that's just built in. So
that's awesome. I just put in the chat the location on our website for the Hawkware product, so you can browse through this to get an idea. We have a lot of free add-ins, we have some paid add-ins, and we have bundle solutions for you. All right, we're getting the 50-minute mark.
All right. Yeah, Toby asked a good question. If the affected files are not known at the time of the engineering change, can they be added later? And you're right. You can do it as a paste as reference if you want to do it manually. But like I said, our advanced actions does have the option to do an attach files transition. So for the items that tend to be affected, that could be a transition action for them to pull them out of, say, released into a kind of a pending state. And during that transition, it prompts you to go find a template to attach it to.
That's nice. So they're in release, you trigger a state transition to work on them, and it basically opens up a browse for searching for the engineering change that you want to attach it to. So you can add to an existing one.
Right, which means they don't have to be documents that are all in the same folder, right? It could be some CAD files. Then you could go to the documentation directories, grab those files, transition them, have a similar action in their workflows, that kind of thing. So again, a lot of flexibility. We wanted to build on all the strengths PDM already had built in, but automate, the repetitive stuff and make it a bit more, a lot more automated. How it does its thing. Didn't talk a lot about the templates themselves. David used an Excel file. We used an EC file, or just a virtual document. XML is a good way to go too. I think even in the admin training, they kind of go through some examples of how you can map the data card variables to XML, and it's pretty flexible for getting something that's printable that looks nice, using style sheets. So you can have company logos and get pretty intricate with it that way too. So that's.
Oh yeah. Peter had a question. I think it's in the answered question. Let me see. Chris, the question is, when you have the DZCO file attached to multiple parts and assemblies, which may not be directly related, how do you prevent the cross-linking when doing a get latest or version or doing a copy tree? He says that his experience with similar UCO process can wind up getting hundreds of files when only 100, like more than 100, when just a couple are needed from the assembly that you want.
Right. And we see that a little bit here as well. What we have to keep in mind, and it's a little bit of a user training, that when we're doing these transition triggered attach actions, that users understand that it's explicitly taking any file that it's going through that transition and grouping those together and attaching them. And so by default, out of the box, PDM wants to transition everything that can be transitioned together because they're all separately referenced. So certainly coming out of release with an assembly, if I'm changing the top level assembly, as we saw in the presentation, by default we'll grab everything. And so some of that's just an order of operations. You just want to make sure that you don't transition everything unless you're actually changing everything, because they will all get attached as reference. The contains can look a little funny too. Like if I tried to show just top level only, because then that explicitly shows everything that's there. But if I did the assembly like this, and then it's got all of its sub-assemblies and components, these aren't all attached to the engineering change, only this document is. But if I were changing them, then this tree would get really long, because this would be here with all of its references underneath, but then each of those would be under there, and if they have references, theirs were underneath. So this list would look pretty intimidating if you don't just limit it to first level, because that's really all we're concerned with, is the immediate references. And those are what we're going to write to the data card, and those are what we're going to kind of use in the triggering activities. But good question.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. I think we're gonna let you guys a bit of time to switch between sessions. Thank you very much for attending this session. Like I said, if you have any question on Hawkware product, I put the link in there. It's on our website. And we're looking forward to help you with any, custom add-ins, custom solution. We have a great solution in-house, and thank you again for attending the session.